Good afternoon. Welcome to this public debriefing from BEREC. So it's the debriefing of our 31st plenary that has taken place in Portugal. And I will so debrief you with the help of Elisabeth Dornetshumer, who is co-chair of the Roaming Expert Group, coming from the Austrian regulator, and Michiel van Dijk, co-chair of the Net Neutrality Expert Group, coming from the regulator from the Netherlands. So, maybe comment on fait pour skipper les... Okay. So, just to come back to what I presented at the public debriefing of the first plenary. This year, I will try to explain what BEREC is doing under 3 different chapters. The first one is how BEREC can contribute to enhance connectivity. The second one is how BEREC is safeguarding an open environment in the digital ecosystem. And the third one is how BEREC is reinventing himself from within. So on the first topic, which deals with connectivity, which is not only a buzzword but the hot topic in Brussels. We are issuing guidelines on wholesale roaming. As you know, it's an important topic. And we had also a summit with our counterparts from different regional networks of regulators. Regarding the objective of safeguarding an open environment, we are publishing a report on net neutrality regulatory assessment methodology. I will come back to this quite complex expression. A report on IP interconnection practices, and I will also update you about our international activities on net neutrality. And last but not least, I will tell you what we are going to put in a public consultation regarding our midterm strategy for 2018-2020. So regarding our objective to enhance connectivity, as I mentioned, we have 2 principal items, and the first one is dealing with roaming. So you know that roaming, like at home, will be a reality for all the consumers in Europe in several days now. So it's a quite urgent issue. The legislative framework had organized several regulations to take. All these documents have been taken or are about to be taken in the next days. And on its part, BEREC was supposed to adopt several documents and guidelines, and we will publish not today, but the 9th of June, our final guideline. I would like also to tell you that on roaming, we are also working on a more informal basis between NRAs. So, because, well, we are experiencing different situations in the different member states, because we have not the same starting point regarding the roaming tariffs. We have not the same traffic balance between, people visiting the countries and people from the countries visiting abroad. So we decided to have informal exchanges during our plenary in Portugal. So we gave the opportunity to several of us to present the situation in their country to make sure that we are all going in the same direction. And now I give the floor maybe to go more into detail regarding the roaming guidelines that we will publish in 2 days to Elisabeth Dornetshumer.
Thank you, Sébastien. As you just said, the wholesale guidelines were adopted in the last plenary and are supposed to be published by the end of the week. And they represent an update of the Article 3 guidelines that were published in 2012 by the operators. And they take into account the new provisions of the wholesale regulation that come into effect on the 15th of June 2017. The wholesale guidelines include guidance regarding the access to wholesale roaming services and the reference offer that operators have to publish on their website. The guidelines are there to explain the regulation, and NRA shall take them into utmost account. Furthermore, they contribute to a harmonized implementation across Europe. Now coming to the content of the guidelines. The first section contains some general information about the wholesale roaming access obligations. Which types of services must be offered by the operators, what is a reasonable request for wholesale roaming access, and who is entitled to ask for wholesale roaming access. The second section explains the different ways to get access, either direct or resale access, and it also provides guidance which services MNOs have to offer at the regulated wholesale cap, so everything that is needed to provide a retail roaming service in general. Furthermore, which additional services they may offer against fair and reasonable prices. In addition, there is a section about the reference offer that operators have to publish on their website for both direct and resale wholesale access. And according to the new wholesale amendments in the roaming regulation, operators may include measures to prevent permanent roaming. So they may ask for information that allows them to detect permanent roaming. The information that they can collect is based on the Commission implementing regulation on the fair use policy and the objective criteria mentioned there. Once an operator detects permanent roaming, they can set measures to prevent it. And as a last resort, and this brings me to my last section of the guidelines, the operator can, once less stringent measures failed, and after informing the access seeker, have the possibility to terminate the contract. Such a unilateral termination of the wholesale agreement, however, only may take place once the NRA has authorized it. So the termination is preceded by a request of the visited MNO to the relevant NRA. The visit NRA then has to consult the NRA in regard of the access seeker. Both NRAs, so the visited NRA as well as the host NRA, may also ask BEREC to adopt an opinion on that. And BEREC's opinion has to be taken into utmost account in any final decision. Thanks. I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. So now we will see how it goes on roaming in our country. So this piece is completing our existing guidelines on the retail market, and now we have the operators will have the complete picture also on the wholesale market. So just a word also about our summit that we had in Portugal with our colleagues from different regional groups of regulators. So we had a summit with Regulatel, which is a group gathering regulators from South America, EMERG, gathering regulators from Africa and Middle East, and also the Eastern Partnership, gathering regulators from the east of Europe. We were about 45 NRAs present during this meeting. And so we had discussions. The main focus of the day was connectivity. And so we discussed about how we articulate investment and regulation, how we articulate spectrum and mobile connectivity. And we had also a discussion about net neutrality, because, you know, in several countries there is a little bit a question in developing countries about does net neutrality is necessary, or should there be some kind of priority between connectivity and net neutrality? So we had discussions about this. And we issued a joint declaration that you can find, that will be published today, no? Yes? Yes. That will be published today. And so this declaration brings a common view from all the regulators involved on these different topics. And especially, this is something that we share between all the regulators present in this summit, is that competition drives investment. But this is something not new regarding BEREC. Okay. Now I turn to our second set of subjects dealing with net neutrality and safeguarding an open environment. So what are the hot topics for this after the second plenary of the year? So you can see the different topics here, and I think it's not useful that I present it once again, and I give immediately the floor to Michiel van Dijk.
Thank you, Sébastien. First, I'll talk about work of the Net Neutrality Expert Working Group. BEREC has drafted a draft methodology. The full title of the document is a Net Neutrality Regulatory Assessment Methodology. And what is this? This is basically a set of recommendations from BEREC about how to measure speed and delay of internet access services. This can be interesting to see if users get the service in terms of speed and delay that they have contracted. This methodology also helps in determining traffic management practices. For example, they can help in making software that can detect blocking of traffic, degradation of traffic, or throttling of traffic. And all of these traffic management practices can be illegal. They can also be lawful. And this methodology helps for a harmonized or a more harmonized approach in detecting these practices. And last point is that it can help in determining a general quality of the internet access service in a given market. And this can be a useful thing to know if an NRA has to make a decision about whether a specialized service is compatible with the regulation or whether it is not. So then the next slide. I will not take you through the whole report. You'll be able to read this, of course, and especially also welcome to comment on it during the consultation. But we structured it this way. First chapter is about how to measure speed and quality. Then we have a dedicated chapter on traffic management practices. And we also have a chapter dealing with environmental issues around the measurement. For example, the use of Wi-Fi or the inclusion of Wi-Fi in a measurement should be taken account of, because obviously it has an effect on or it can have obviously an effect on the internet speed. And then we have recommendations about how to assess the measurement results. Because, of course, having a single measurement does not necessarily mean that you can draw definitive conclusions from this as an NRA. So sometimes you need to have more measurements to be able to say something. The last chapter is about certification of a measurement of a monitoring mechanism. This is a rule that is in the regulation as well, and we try to help NRAs if they want to in certifying. Maybe it's not necessary for everyone, but on the next slide, to give you some context. Of course, BEREC has published last summer the Net Neutrality Guidelines. They deal very shortly about measurement methodology. So this document is meant to accompany this set of guidelines. Then next slide, what is next? As I said, we'll initiate a consultation period now that will run until 15th of July. We run it the traditional way and on an online platform called Discuto. This allows you to give comments or even text suggestions, if you like, per alinea or per paragraph. Well, you may not wish to comment all the paragraphs of the document, but that's up to you. You're happily invited to do so. You can also submit general comments. And our plan is to take into account the comments sent this summer, and then the revised document will be up for approval in the next plenary in October. So that was on the regulatory assessment methodology. Then we moved to a report on IP interconnection, which I also present, although it was drafted by the Next Generation Networks working group. This report is an update of the 2012 report on IP interconnection that BEREC made. And this obviously, it also takes into account the BEREC workshop that was held last November, and deals with a large amount of empirical evidence. I will not read all the details on this. Maybe some general comments in addition to facts we found. It also describes some of the things that we see happening, and we see two things happening. Content application providers sometimes say that ISPs cause problems in the IP interconnection, but the other way around, that's the second bullet, also happens. We also see that there are little cases submitted to NRAs for enforcement or for dispute resolution. And then, of course, BEREC has taken account of activities in several NRAs, such as in the Netherlands as well. I think on the next slide we can see the conclusions. We see that the internet is still able to cope with increasing amounts of traffic. We also see that the disputes that arise are often complex, and they seem to be in the middle of economic and strategic considerations. We also note that most disputes seem to be resolved without intervention of NRAs. I think in line with what Sébastien said earlier, we remain to think that competition is an important element in the supply chain to make sure consumers get most value for their money. I think the conclusion is that we say that NRA should continue to watch this subject because it is an important part of the internet. At the same time, we do not see a problem right here, right now. Then we have a consultation on this as well, with the same date as the net neutrality report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michiel. And then last point regarding this open environment topic, just an update about our international cooperation on net neutrality. So, as I informed you in January, the BEREC mini board, which is a little bit, let's say, the steering committee of the BEREC, has organized this year its study trip in India. So we saw interesting things. I will not debrief you about this study trip now because we will issue in several weeks a specific document on that. But I just wanted to mention you that during this study trip we had really good exchanges with TRAI, the telecom regulators in India, specifically on net neutrality, and we decided to work together to see whether we can share some common approach on this common understanding, let's say, on several topics regarding net neutrality. So this is an ongoing subject. And as I mentioned, we had this summit with BEREC, Regulatel, EMERG, and the Eastern Partnership last week. And in the declaration, we really reasserted our commitment on net neutrality as a very important principle that should rely not only on technical issues, but also on commercial ones. And now let's go to our third part of the presentation, which is reinventing BEREC from within. You know, BEREC is a quite young body because we are, I don't remember, 6 or 7 years old, so we are still a child. But we can improve, we can change our practice and make BEREC better. And in particular, so we launched after the last plenary, we launched a public consultation, a first open public consultation on the review of our midterm strategy. So we got inputs from the various stakeholders. At this time, we were opening very wide and open questions. And now we are putting on the table a proposal about our strategy that is submitted, that will be today submitted to a further public consultation. So the most important topic is that we are proposing 5 strategic priorities for the 3 coming years. The first one deals with how our regulation can accompany the changes, the important changes in the market structure linked to the rolling out of high-capacity networks. So here is where again we will talk about how competition can foster investment. Our second item is a little bit broadening the picture of the classical telecom landscape, and one of our strategic priority may be to look at potential bottlenecks outside the classical telecom scope and more broadly in the digital ecosystem. Our third strategic priority will deal with enabling 5G, which is, as you know, a very important topic at European level, and promoting more broadly speaking innovation in network technologies, like, for instance, the Internet of Things. Our fourth strategic priority will deal with net neutrality. This is not a surprise, and we will focus on how to foster a consistent approach between NRAs. And our fifth strategic priority will deal with consumer empowerment and how we can define possibly new ways to boost this empowerment through data or open gov practices, for instance. There is a video, actually, I think it's a video of myself, actually. I've not been looking at it, so I hope it's not too terrible, that tries to explain concretely why have we launched this exercise and proposed these 5 strategic priorities. This video will be available on the website of BEREC. So the next step, as I mentioned, is that we publish the document today for consultation. So I invite our stakeholders and every people to contribute on our consultation tool. I would say if you have something to tell to BEREC, it's a good moment, and after it will be too late. And we will adopt our strategy for the next plenary in October. I wanted also to come back on our works regarding the framework review. As you know, in the frame of the digital single market strategy, the European Commission has proposed to review the whole telecom legal framework. The Commission has put on the table a proposal on last September, and the Parliament is presently working on it, and the Council too. BEREC has issued last year in December a high-level opinion that is still BEREC's position, and this document is fully valid, and this is the high-level position on BEREC on the proposal from the Commission. In the same time, we wanted to go into more details regarding the proposal from the Commission, and we also wanted to take into account the debate at the Parliament level. So we decided with our colleagues to contribute not with a kind of second opinion, but with more targeted inputs, with the idea not to take political positions, because this is absolutely not our role, we are a technical body, but to provide inputs, technical inputs on subjects that are sometimes tricky, and let's say often very tricky. It's very technical. So we had the feeling that we could be useful for that, and actually we were also answering to many solicitations from members of the parliaments that had the feeling to lack a little bit of several inputs. So we provided these inputs by publishing these 12 papers regarding the code, plus one paper. So the code is the legal package on the substance of the regulation, and we also issue a paper about the BEREC regulation, which is the text that organized what is BEREC and how it works. So I will not go into any of these documents. What I wanted to tell you is, first, our intention. I've heard something like BEREC is lobbying. Actually, BEREC cannot lobby because we are not defending any interest except the public interest. So I don't know if defending the public interest can be considered as lobbying. Maybe, I don't know. So what I would like to clearly stress is that we fully respect the political objectives defined by the Commission, by the European Parliament, by the Council, and the priority that political people in European institutions wants to give to connectivity and to investment. And our contribution is fully integrated in that frame, and we just want to help political people to take the good decisions based on technical inputs. The other thing I wanted to tell you about these papers is that our strong belief at BEREC level is that regulation is not the problem, and even that regulation can be the solution. So sometimes we see discussions about less or more regulation. We think that it's more to find the better regulation, the one that is more adapted to one situation. And so we believe that regulation has provided in the past certainty, predictability, incentive to investment, and we consider that any step back in regulation should be considered very cautiously. And the third, let's say, general message I would like to send regarding the publication of these papers is that when it deals with harmonization, we fully acknowledge the fact that there is a need to foster a better, a more intense harmonization in Europe. To be concrete about this, we believe that it's more efficient and pragmatic to promote soft regulation rather than too centralized and one-size-fits-all approach. So just to discuss two points, several of our papers are dealing with access obligations. So, you know, access is the legal regime that allow national regulators to mandate access to the network, and in particular to the network of the incumbent operators. So, as I mentioned, we consider that it is our job to define the most appropriate regulatory treatment. We consider that having the ability to regulate non-competitive oligopolies should be considered. So the idea here is not to regulate everything. I've heard something like BEREC and NRAs, they want to regulate everything. If you look at our track record, I mean, we are more deregulators than regulators because since 20 years we have regulating a shorter and shorter part of the market every year. Just remember in the beginning of the opening of the market to competition that we were regulating retail markets, for instance. This is not the case anymore. There was a list of, I don't remember, 18 markets 15 years ago. Now we have 4 or 5 markets that are regulated. So there is no regulatory obsession. We just want to do the job and to have the ability to regulate when there is real consumer harm and non-competitive situations, which is hopefully not the situation in the main countries in Europe. We also, I would like also to mention that we are aware that the European Commission has also opened a consultation process on its SMP guidelines. So SMP guidelines deals with the present regime of regulation of the dominant operators, and we will contribute to this consultation. But what we are seeing for the moment is that the intention of the Commission is not to address this non-competitive oligopoly situation in the frame of these SMP guidelines. That is why we make proposals aside. Regarding the spectrum issues, so as I mentioned to you at the last public debriefing, BEREC welcomes a Commission's proposal for a targeted role to all national regulators when it deals with spectrum management and specifically on market shaping aspect. What you have to get in mind is that today in the European framework, all that deals with spectrum is in the hands of the member states with several coordination process and several intentions of the Commission to sometimes take what they call implementing act to foster harmonization. So we welcome this idea of to give to NRAs a specific role because we consider that competition and market shaping are very close subjects, and it could make sense to give this targeted role to NRAs. It would also make sense because when giving a competence to NRAs, it's give the ability to the BEREC to work on it and then to promote what I would call soft harmonization. You know, when BEREC is entitled to work on something, it means that we issue best practices, we issue reports, we issue guidelines, exactly like those that have been presented by Elisabeth and Michiel on roaming issue, on net neutrality issue, on IP interconnection. Because these topics of roaming, net neutrality, IP interconnection are today in our scope of competencies, which is not the case of spectrum. So this may be a game changer in the promotion of harmonization in Europe, and BEREC welcomes it. In the same time, we are not really happy with the idea of having a one-size-fits-all when it deals with the spectrum license duration, and we consider that 25 years seems a very, a pretty long period. If you look at 25 years before now, for instance, we were in 1992. I think that in 1992 it was difficult to give spectrum with such an important time frame. So now today, imagine we would grant spectrum to operators until 2042. Sounds weird. Regarding the peer review, which is a proposal from the Commission to promote harmonization between NRAs within this new task that they would have to manage with. So the idea of this peer review is that when an NRA is taking a decision about a spectrum granting award procedure in its country, then the NRA should consult BEREC, and BEREC should issue a formal opinion. We consider that this proposal is, we understand the intent, which is good, but in practice, it seems not very efficient and very bureaucratic. That is why we propose two alternatives. The first one is to keep the peer review, but keeping it only as a voluntary process, meaning that an NRA that wants to test its procedure would have the ability to do that, but those who want to make it more quickly, for instance, can avoid the procedure. The other solution that we put on the table, and it's quite constructive, is rather to have a formal process with an opinion issued by BEREC, rather to organize the workshop, where the NRA would have the opportunity and obligation to discuss with their peers, experts from other NRAs, but also experts from RSPG, which is the Radio Spectrum Policy Group, experts from the Commission. So NRAs will have the opportunity to stress test their procedure in a technical environment. So we consider this could be a good way to promote a soft harmonization. Sorry, I'm quite long. But these are important topics. So I'm almost done. I just wanted to announce to you the next steps. For the next plenary that will take place in 3 months in Romania, we will put this document on the table. So first, we will consult on a common position on monitoring of mobile network coverage. So you know that today, for regulators, it's difficult to show a map of mobile coverage of Europe. So this could be a first step in that direction. And we will also issue a consultation on a report on how to facilitate mobile connectivity in challenge areas. So meaning how to install mobile networks in subways or in rural areas, for instance. And this document will be realized with RSPG, I guess, no? Yes? Yes. We will also issue a consultation on BEREC report on the impact of content markets and devices on electronic communication services market. So this is, let's say, a first step regarding this strategic priority I mentioned in our midterm strategy, dealing with bottlenecks in the digital ecosystem outside of the telecom one. And we will also be open to further steps in the review process, in particular if the EU institutions want to ask BEREC to produce any technical input in the review, we will be available for that. Regarding net neutrality, so we will adopt the reports on the net neutrality regulatory assessment methodology and on IP interconnection practices, and we will go on our cooperation at international level. We will also adopt our midterm strategy that I mentioned today and launch a public consultation on our next year's program, which is being prepared by RTR, which is the Austrian regulator, because as you remember, Johannes Gungel will be the chairman of BEREC next year, so it's its duty to prepare next year's workshop. Thank you for your attention, and I open the floor to questions.
Thank you. I can make a start. It's Ralf Nigge from Deutsche Telekom. I have a question on the technical papers, in fact, on the review. 3 of these papers were published, all of the papers were published on May 11th. And 3 of the papers were used, actually, in the run-up to the deadline for amendments in the European Parliament on this telecoms code, which was in March. And they were later published as documents 1784, 1794, and 1790. One of them was the one on joint dominance and oligopolies. That was one of the papers. Now, my question is, when were these papers formally adopted by BEREC? We know when they were published, May 11th, but my question is, when were they formally adopted? And that matters because, or why I'm asking, just to explain. If they were not adopted, there would of course be an issue somehow because they were used in March, even though they were not used with the BEREC logo and not used with the document number, but they were used. If they were adopted in March prior to them being used in the legislative process, then there would be a question why they weren't published, because it's unfortunate that we see the paper, which already was there in its essence and already had an effect in the political debate, only in May, when actually they were ready in March. And in these 6 weeks, there was a lot of political debate, obviously, and it was difficult for stakeholders to react if they hadn't seen these papers. So either way, that's why I thought it was interesting to see when they were formally adopted. There may be an issue around transparency and an issue around, let's say, a trade-off between acting quickly and acting after, in view of involving all stakeholders, etc. And if my last comment, and I finish. If you look at the explanatory note on the papers and also the way you just put it, they want to contribute to the policy debate where it stands with publications on the 11th of May. And there's maybe, again, in view of them having been inspiring already amendments in March, this may be slightly misleading. That was just the comment, but again, the question, when were the papers adopted? Just these three. So the comments on the Toshanovsky report, spectrum, license duration, and collective dominance. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. These documents have been adopted in due time, and it is clear that under BEREC's running rules, no document can be circulated if not approved by the Board of Regulators. Another question is when BEREC decides to publish its document, because you know that BEREC issues many documents for internal purpose, for instance. And the decision we made is to publish all the documents as a whole, to have the most comprehensive approach. And one of the considerations that we took into account is that it is true that we have adopted several papers more quickly, but we didn't want, by publishing them too early, giving the impression that we give too much importance to these topics. So this is the decisions that have been taken by the Board of Regulators. But I'm happy to get your feedback on this process. Thank you.
Just one very quick reaction, and thank you for the transparent and open answer. And they have been extremely important and influential in this process on the code, because the proposals of the papers were taken up by several of the political groups in the Parliament. So they have been, in that sense, they have been a very important input to the debate. And it would have been good to see them at the time, so one could have reacted. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. Johannes Theis, German Broadband Association, BRECO. First of all, thanks for the overview, and I would also like to raise a question on the papers of the code. We very much welcome the papers overall. I think they are quite, as you said, technical input with useful arguments for legislators. There is one thing that, however, we do not really understand. Well, on the one hand, BEREC says that it would like to regulate anti-competitive oligopolies, which is entirely fair, we think. At the same time, it chooses not just one mean to do that, but several. On the one hand, it goes for a concept that you call unilateral market power, but at the same time, it extends symmetrical regulation to an extent that is going far beyond the Commission proposal. And that even seems to establish the symmetrical regime as a fully fledged alternative to the current SMP regime. Now, you said yourself in a recently published article that BEREC seems to have a certain preference for the competition and analysis-oriented version, so unilateral market power. But then that leaves the question, why do you need the second approach, which was originally a bottleneck approach, but now seems to be we regulate not just bottlenecks or oligopolies, but we regulate everybody approach. Why is that still inside? Many thanks.
There is no approach where we regulate everybody, as I mentioned, because we want to be targeted and to deliver a regulation that fits for our purpose. Well, this is in the hand of the co-legislators, in the end, to find the best solution to fix the problem. What is important to us is that the problem is really taken into account. In several countries, the situation of the market is really not satisfactory, and the competitive dynamic is not there. Prices are high, investments are low, and I think that it is important to find a solution to fix that. We noticed that the Commission is launching a process regarding the reviewing of its SMP guidelines. That may be a solution, but what we see from this, for the moment, doesn't seem to be an adequate answer. Symmetric can be one, UMP can be another, and there is clearly no preferences, and sorry if I have not been clear on that, between these different options for BEREC. We just want to solve the problem with the more secure framework, with the less administrative burden to fix it. This is really, we are really in a problem-solving approach. To be honest, the number of member states concerned about this situation is limited. But still, for the people that live in these countries, it's important to fix the problem, whatever the solution is.
Also, a quick follow-up. Have you assessed the dangers on other member states of the solution that you propose?
Yeah. There is a proportionality principle in the framework. A regulator cannot wake up one day, well, I want to regulate this guy because I don't appreciate his face. We have to prove that there is a competitive problem. We have to prove that the solution is proportionate. We organize public consultation. In several countries, we consult the competition authority that issue sometime a formal opinion about our market analysis. And finally, we issue the document to the Commission that can trigger this Article 7A procedure. We are pretty much controlled. And after the adoption of our market analysis document, still our work can be challenged in court. So, we are reasonable, and we have this proportionality principle, and our track record since 20 years shows that we are more in a deregulation process than over-regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio Mendola, AT&T. First of all, let me thank you for engaging so transparently with us, with the stakeholders. This is always very helpful. I have two very quick questions. First one, you mentioned earlier on how difficult it is for regulators to step back on their own regulations. And so my question is, as you, of course, are very well aware, the FCC has recently launched a so-called notice of proposed rulemaking on their own Title II classification rules. So I was wondering whether this has already triggered, or if not, if it will trigger an internal debate in BEREC on the different approach of the FCC, and if there has been already some formal exchange of views or informal exchange of views. The second one is about Arcep, that recently has published a very interesting study on how devices and their operating systems can influence users' ability to access the internet. It's a very interesting study because it acknowledges that the openness of the internet is based on a very technical chain, and sometimes certain operators simply are not targeted by regulations. So I was wondering whether this angle will be also taken by BEREC in the future or not. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. If I gave you the impression that it's difficult for regulator to step back, that was not my message. We are stepping back on regulation every day when it deals with retail regulation, for instance, or regulating at a more downstream level. So we have no problem with withdrawing progressively this ex ante regulation. When it deals with net neutrality, which is the question you raised regarding what is happening in the United States, we have in Europe a very, very different legal system. In the United States, the legal system relies on the Telecommunication Acts from 1996. In Europe, the legal system is the regulation on open internet adopted in 2015. So we as regulator are putting in place this regulation today, and we don't have the choice. This is a clear mandate from the political institutions, the European Parliament, the Council, the European Commission. The co-legislators have issued a text that mandate regulators to make net neutrality a reality and to really guarantee this principle. And we are really committed to do that. And I hope what we are showing today in terms of deliverable shows that we are very much involved in that process. So there is no step back possible. The step back is not at the regulator's level. It's a political decision. We don't have, like in the US, we regulators, the ability to withdraw net neutrality principles. This is not our responsibility. Another issue is, do we have discussed about this? I would say not really, because as I mentioned, we don't have really the choice. And so we are really committed in putting in place the rules that have been adopted. We are in contact with the Federal Communication Commission at technical level. I've met Mr. Pai in Barcelona, and we are looking for next meetings to continue this relationship, which is important, not only on net neutrality, but on spectrum and on several issues. One thing that may be discussed is about our evaluation of the regulation, because you know that regulators have to issue at national level an implementing report every year. So we have issued this in many countries, because I think the deadline was the 13th of May, no, 15th of June, okay. So we have issued or are about to issue. And BEREC has decided on top of that to have a common work, which is not mandatory under the legal framework. So we send questionnaires to all the NRAs, and the net neutrality group is gathering these questionnaires, and we will issue at the end of the year a report on the implementation of the regulation. And we don't, it is possible, maybe, we don't know, that we may issue recommendations in this document, but let's say we will not propose to withdraw the regulation. I can bet on it. I think that there is also a kind of rendezvous clause in the regulation in 2019 for the evaluation on the regulation. So this may be part of next year works program under Johannes Gungel's chairmanship. So he will have the pleasure to discuss this with you next year. And your last question was about enlarging the discussion on the bottlenecks. So yes, we have issued a first, this is not really a report, it's kind of launch note, I would say, that we have issued at Arcep in order to launch a debate on the question of the handsets and the operation systems and their impact on the ability of the consumers to access to the internet. It's a national initiative at this stage, but as I mentioned, we should work also on this subject at BEREC level, because we will consult in October on a report on the impact on the devices and also on the content markets on the electronic communications market. So at some extent, this will be discussed at BEREC level also.
Just clarification on the last point you mentioned. In October, there will be a draft BEREC report on this issue. Is that correct?
Yes, it will be a draft report. We will consult on a draft report, and if everything's okay, we will adopt definitely the report at the 4th plenary in December. Sorry, not at the 4th plenary, but at the first plenary in 2018.
Hi, Siobhan Cameron, Covington. Does BEREC expect to offer any further guidance on the concept of zero rating this year?
Excuse me, I just didn't catch who.
The concept of zero rating in terms of net neutrality.
I mean, but
my name is Siobhan Cameron from Covington.
You know, zero rating is it's a complex issue because it is not forbidden in itself, but in some cases it can infringe the regulation. So today, several NRAs are in the process to look at several zero rating practices to see whether they will clean or forbid these practices. And we are in an informal process at BEREC level to just share information about this, to know about what our neighbors and colleagues are doing. But the principle of the regulation is that the implementation of the regulation is made at national level. So we don't have to, BEREC doesn't have to interfere in what national regulators are doing. This will be possibly a subject where we will report on in our implementation report. So we will see exactly what we will say in that frame. But I mean, we in our work program, there is no idea to adopt guidelines or a common position, formal common position on zero ratings this year.
Thank you.
Magnus Franklin from MLEX. On roaming, could you just clarify how the NRAs are going to be working with the entry into force of the regulation? Because we had Andreas Arcep blogging last week that there are likely competition and regulation problems or compliance problems with price increases. So if you have tackled that already, or if you have submitted information that led him to draw that conclusion, or when we can expect more concrete information on whether the roaming regulation is complied with or not.
Yeah, I will give the floor to Elisabeth to explain into details. What I can tell you is that we have concretely several topics to work on at national level. For instance, the comment on dit la clause d'exclusion? Exemption clause, for instance. The sustainability clause. operators, if they consider that roaming like at home can really jeopardize their economic equilibrium, they can ask the regulator for an exemption. So this is typically the things we will have to do in a very short term. Regarding the question of prices increase, I understand the political perspective, and it is clear that consumers are of utmost importance in this story. In the same time, as I mentioned, we are not regulating the retail prices anymore since years. And we are not in the idea to re-regulate the retail prices. Not only because it would be old-fashioned, because our job is to develop competition. And so the main way to avoid unnecessary price increase is competition, is to maintain in the legal framework the ability to regulators to foster competition in their country. This is the long-term guarantee against possible abuse in the market. And regarding roaming, specifically, we don't have any specific tool. So we use the general tool, which is the promotion of competition. Maybe, Elisabeth, if you want to give more details.
Yeah, on the implementation of the fair use policy, for example, it's a task of the NRAs to monitor and to enforce the regulation. We are in close cooperation with all of the NRAs. They are approached by the operators with several questions on the implementation on the fair use policy. We developed an internal FAQ list where we exchange views to contribute to harmonized implementation of the fair use policy. And also on the sustainability cases, we are coordinating. There is a number of NRAs that have to deal with sustainability application, and some of them concern the same operators in different member states, so we also do some coordination in this work.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, Frederik de Bakker, Telefonica again. On the topic of the peer review and the latest paper that you published, which I didn't read, of course, yet. But I mean, I am very pleased to see that you propose some constructive alternatives, because I think from Telefonica's point of view, the idea of peer review, we think it's a good idea, although of course we might need to talk on how to implement exactly. But my question is, when I just read the sentence and the second option you wrote about kind of stress test for the proposal, would that stress test be only on the market shaping aspect measures or on the whole spectrum license procedure? Because I mean, so in history some things went wrong also on issues which are not necessarily only the market shaping aspects of the license auctions.
We understand the proposal of the Commission about giving to NRAs this competence on market shaping. We understand this proposal as organizing a summa divisio between, let's say, the technical coordination that would stay clearly in the hands of the member states. But in the same time, to give the hand to independent and market-oriented regulators when it deals with how to organize the auction, the award procedure. So that's what we understand. And behind this expression market shaping, it's almost all that deals with the award procedure. So that's the point. But we don't want to. We are not challenging the separation. that the Commission is proposing. So that is why we are using the same vocabulary as the Commission, which is market shaping. So what we want to express is that we, NRAs, are ready to work on that, not only at national level, but also to share this at BEREC level under the form of a workshop that would be open to other experts. And the idea to open the workshop, in particular to experts from RSPG, is to give the opportunity to enlarge, if necessary, the discussion if there are technical questions, to not be too much working in silos, because in the end, the frontiers may not be so clear. So the idea is to have a more soft approach with this stress test proposal. But in my understanding, it's almost all the aspects or the attribution of the award procedure that may be concerned, but not, for instance, the technical coordinations. Yes?
One more question, Magnus here from MLEX. The kind of papers you submitted for the code review, do you envisage doing that for any of the other legislation that's on the table, for example, the e-privacy regulation?
The expert working group, which is dedicated to the review of the framework and all the legislations, is working on the e-privacy directive, but there is no regulation, the e-privacy regulation, but there is no decision for the moment to publish anything. So we don't know. We will see, and it depends on the context. And I want to mention you that if I'm correct, BEREC has issued a first document regarding the e-privacy review last year.
If there are no questions, I want to make you comment on political theory. When you said that you're not sure if you can lobby because you defend the public interest. I think that's not totally correct, because I think the public interest is not something, it's not a given, it's not something fixed. So as agencies or companies which we are not elected by the public, we always represent interests. But with that, I do not want to say that it's illegitimate what you did. But I don't think it's from political theory correct to say that we do not lobby because we pursue public interest, as public interest was some objective given that is non-controversial, which it isn't.
Yeah, I appreciate the debate. I wanted to react on the term lobby that I heard, and which is very, connoted. So my point is, I think that when BEREC issues technical papers, for me, it's not the same as when such operator or association issue a paper, because we are not representative or a private party. We try, like many people, to go in the sense of the general interest, which is, I agree with you, which is not immanent. Public interest is something hard to define, but at least this is what we are trying to work for. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, and see you in 3 months.